In this video I'm going to show you how to create a parquet material. So let's look at some examples first. Here is your basic new parquet. Well, not new, it looks like it was restored and lacquered. So you can see that it's pretty glossy. Some parts are reflecting all the light, some parts are not reflecting at all. Well, almost not reflecting. And it's quite uneven. The reflection is not straight, it has some bump to it, it has the wood grain visible, it is a bit distorted. So this is a new parquet floor. You can see the reflections are very glossy. There is absolutely no wood grain bump, it's been recently sanded, and the reflections are a bit distorted. They are not perfectly straight, but they go in a slight curve. So here's another example. This is an older parquet floor. You can see that the seams are not reflecting at all. They're also pretty visible. And the reflections are pretty blurry here. It's actually very rare that you can find a parquet floor with sharp reflections. Here's another one. You can see the bump clearly. You can see the reflections are blurred again. So here's something fresher. Still you can see the bump. The seams are pretty pronounced. Well, the reflections are sharper in this example, but still they are not perfectly sharp, and you can see some distortion to the overall shape of the reflection. So let's start by creating a simple parquet pattern. I've chosen this one. It's Oak Brittany. And we're not going to use oak, we're going to use, let's say, mahogany we created in the previous tutorial. And we're gonna draw this texture from scratch in 3D Max. Well, many people prefer to make line drawings in Photoshop. I hate Photoshop drawing tools, so I'm going to use the 3D Max line drawing tools. So first I'm going to open an empty scene. This technique works for all sorts of parquet, all sorts of wooden inlay, or complex marble floor where you need to create a pattern that's composed from different textures. So this is my reference. I'm going to use it as the reference image in the top viewport. So press Alt plus B, select your reference image, and here I choose the panel. OK. Choose Match Bitmap Aspect Ratio and enable Lock Zoom and Pan. This way the image is not distorted and stays in place while we zoom or pan around. So I'm going to use the line tool and the rectangle tool to replicate the shape of this panel. Basically you want to create the lines where you see the seams. So let's make it perfectly square. Now convert it to a double spline, select this line, and I'm going to outline it so we get an even distance from the sides to the inner part, like this. Okay, now let's create another rectangle here. Convert to editable spline. Select all the corner vertices, set them to corner type, and chamfer them, like this. Perfect. Okay. Now let's create another rectangle. Snapping to the inner rectangle of this first shape. Now enable angle snap and rotate it 45 degrees. Now let's scale it down so it matches our outer border. Try to make it so that it touches the border exactly, so there are no gaps between it. Okay, like this. So now all that's left is these seams here. I'm using the line tool with snap enabled. And hold shift to draw a straight line to here. Another one here. And here. And this one was wrong. Actually goes to the side. And this one down. Okay. Now let's create these center parts here. First, let's copy this rectangle. Copy, convert to editable poly. Select these edges and simply use the connect tool on them. Set the segments to 2 and reduce the pinch value to match our reference image, like this. Okay. And same for these edges now. Perfect. Now select these edges we created first and use the create shape from selection tool. Set it to linear and press OK. Now select these edges and do the same. Now delete the polygon, not the polygon but the object, and all that's left is the line drawing of our Parquet panel. So let's select the first rectangle we drew and attach everything else to it. Let's adjust these points a little bit so they are not overlapping as much. Close the gaps. You don't want any gaps here. It's better to overlap a little bit than leave a gap. So you just saw how quick and easy it is to create a simple line drawing of a Parquet panel or whatever you need to draw. What we're going to do now, we're going to create a simple black and white rendering to use in Photoshop. So first, go to the rendering tab and enable it in renderer and viewport. Okay, now let's scale the panel to the correct size. This sort of panel would be about 45 centimeters big. Let's scale it down to 45 centimeters. Okay. Now let's reset the X form so that our rendering size does not use the scaled proportions but use the correct proportions. So if we set it to, for example, if we want 1 millimeter big seams, we set it to 0.1, 0.1, and it creates perfectly sized 1 millimeter seams for our 45 centimeters big panel. So we're going to assign a simple black V-Ray material. Actually, we can use the standard material, no need for V-Ray here. Set it to pure black, assign, change the environment to white, and render. So this is what you get. So once we have this ready, we can change the render size to a very large value, like for example 4000 by 4000, and render. Here's a very high quality line drawing of our Parquet panel. Actually, it seems like the seams might be too big for this size of panel, so let's change them to 1/2 millimeter. That should be enough. Okay, I think this is perfect. Maybe even too big. So let's go back a little bit to 2500 pixels by 2500 pixels. Render it out. And now we just have to save it. I'm going to use the PNG format and save it as Parquet lines. Okay, make sure you enable the alpha channel and press OK. Now let's go to the Photoshop. First of all, some slight issues over here. Okay, let's open up our line drawing. So here it is. What to do next? Well, once you have this line drawing, the rest is easy. First, let's trim the transparent pixels. Edit. Image trim. And it's trimmed perfectly. Now let's create another layer, move it below the first layer, and fill it with a white color. Like this. To create a Parquet texture, it's useful to use more than one panel, because if you use just one panel, the tiling will be too obvious and the repeated pattern will be showing too much. So what we're going to do is copy the lines layer and change the size of our image by increasing it 100%, both in width and height. Okay, fill everything with white, move this to the corner, paste again, move to the other corner, and do the same for the rest of the corners. Okay, so there are some slight misalignment issues here. Let's move these manually. I want to align the seams perfectly. I'm moving the layers by pressing Ctrl and using the arrow keys on my keyboard. Okay, so that's perfect. Let's trim the canvas. Now let's use the bottom right pixel. Okay. Perfect. Now merge all the line layers together. And let's rename it lines. So what we're going to do next is fill these areas with wood. So let's open our mahogany texture. I still like this mahogany honey the best, so I'm going to use this one. Select all, copy, switch back to this parquet texture and paste. Now let's get started by filling in the horizontal planks. So move our texture over here. It's probably too big. We need to make this texture larger or make this parquet texture smaller. I'm going to use the second approach and make the parquet texture smaller. Let's set it to 2000. And paste the mahogany again. Okay, now the grain size is more reasonable. Okay. So I've covered my whole image with the wood texture. And now I will just pick the areas that will show this horizontal grain. So I'm going to use the magic wand tool. Select the lines layer and just pick some of the horizontal boards or planks. Try not to pick two that are right next to each other. Okay. Once I have the selection active, I go to the wood texture layer and press the mask button here. This hides everything except the selected area. Perfect. I'm going to duplicate this layer, delete the mask, and let's say I'm going to rotate the texture 90 degrees, not 90, 180. Rotate, move it around, just so it's not the same as the previous layer. And go back to the lines layer. So now I'm going to select the other boards that were not covered with the previous layer. And simply create another mask. Perfect. So now all our horizontal planks are filled with a nice texture. Let's look at our panel. These two should be horizontal as well. So let's fix that. Delete the layer mask add these ramps to the selection. And create the mask again. Perfect. So now we have our horizontally grained areas filled. We can move on. So copy this again. Paste. Rotate 90 degrees. We're going to do the vertical boards now. And make a copy to fill the whole area of the texture. Okay, now go to the lines layer and select some of the vertical boards. Like this. Create a mask. Perfect. Paste again. Rotate -90 degrees. And fill the whole area again. You can hide this layer to see better which areas you have created and which areas still need texture. So I've hidden it, and now I know that I need to select exactly these spots. Unhide the texture and create a mask. Perfect. Missed a spot here. Okay, looks good. Now we need to create these diagonal areas. So let's look at the panel. So these are following the direction of the plank. And all these are just vertical. All the corners are simply vertical. So let's create the vertical corners now. Paste the texture again. Rotate and cover the whole area. Okay. Select these little corners, triangular parts. Make sure you select the lines layer. Okay, and create a mask for our texture. Looks good. Now let's move on to the diagonal parts. Paste again. Rotate 45 degrees. Maybe let's scale it so it's easier to cover the whole area. Like this. Select some of the diagonal planks. You can actually just select all of them, since none of them are exactly next to each other. So the texture will not be obviously tiled. Go back to this layer and create a mask. Okay. Paste again. Rotate in the other direction. And scale to fit the image. Perfect. Now select these parts. And create the mask, like this. So now we have our basic Parquet texture ready. Let's change the background layer to black. Hide our line drawing and zoom in. So we have nice seams. We have all the wood grain going in the right direction. One more thing we need to do is when you look at the Parquet, you will notice that Just a second. Okay, so when you look at the Parquet, you can see the boards have different lightness, different saturation, different contrast between them. This is what makes the Parquet interesting. So first, just copy everything. Just make a copy with unmodified color information. Use copy merged, paste, and move it to the bottom of the layer stack. Okay. Now I'm going to use some simple adjustments to create some variation to our texture. Go to this layer, make sure you're not selecting the mask part but the diffuse part, and use the curves adjustment tool to make it a bit darker, maybe more contrasty, just slightly, to bring some variation in it. Let's make this part lighter. Okay, move on to the next layer, curves again. Perfect. Maybe change the hue a little bit. And adjust this layer as well. Okay. Next layer. Perfect. And now for the diagonal parts. Very nice. So now we have our Parquet texture with some nice color variation to it. We can make some further adjustments. For example, all these horizontal rhombs are looking the same, so I'm going to select this layer and use the burn tool to make some of them darker. Like this. This way you can adjust the individual boards by changing their color or brightness. Too much. Okay. So I think this is a good starting point for Parquet texture. Let's make the background a bit lighter. It shouldn't be perfectly black. Something like dark gray. Okay. And let's save it. Save it as a PNG. Brittany. Okay. Now we need to create the reflect map. For this I'm going to use the copied layer we made before making the color adjustments. Taking some time to save. Okay, so go back to this layer, reduce the saturation, and make it brighter and a bit more contrasty with curves. like this. This is probably pretty good reflection map. Save it as Parquet reflection. Sorry. Okay, saving. Now for the bump map, I want to emulate this effect that is seen over here. Where is it? Here. So you can see that it is quite uneven. There's quite a bit of noise to the parquet. So one thing we're going to do is adjust our seams a little bit. Unhide the lines layer, duplicate it, edge back, and now let's give it a border stroke just to make it thicker. I'm going to create a layer below it, merge it down, reduce the lightness so it's pure black, and blur it. In this way, these parts closer to seams will be lower than the center parts. It's a very common effect for some older parquet flooring, so like this. Now I want to make the boards a bit more even, so I need to reduce the contrast. I'm going to do that by increasing the lightness of my black and white map. Now I'll reduce the lightness back, increase it again, and the contrast is gone. Change the background layer back to black. Doesn't change anything. Okay, let's leave it like this. Okay, so I will save the image and let's see how it looks in an interior scene. So here's a very basic interior scene. Some walls, a ceiling, some windows and a floor. So I'm going to assign a UVW mapping to the floor, set it to real world map size and create a new material for it. So create a new V-Ray material. And set the diffuse map like this. Use the Parquet map we created. Okay. Oops, that was wrong material. So create a new V-Ray material and set our Parquet texture as the diffuse map. Drag and drop on the floor and preview. So we first need to fix the size. It's much too small right now. So enable use real world scale, and if you remember correctly, one panel is 45 centimeters. So the texture is 2 by 2, so that would make it 90 by 90. So I'm going to change the size to 90 centimeters to 90 centimeters. Okay, unhide all. The scale looks pretty good. Perfect. Now we're going to assign our reflect map. Brittany reflect, set the correct size. Okay, let's enable Fresnel, just like for the regular wood material, and change the Fresnel IOR to 3.5. So, if you've noticed, Parquet floors never have perfectly sharp reflections, so we need to give it some glossiness. Let's reduce it, something like 0.9 for now. And the last step is setting up our bump map. Use this map we created, set the correct size, and let's make a quick render. Okay, so the bump is too strong at the moment. At least I think so. And the reflections could be blurred a bit more. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to reduce the bump to 10. And blur the reflections to 0.8. Let's try again. Now they are too blurry. So we need something between 0.8 and 0.9. So let's try 0.85. Okay, this looks pretty good. One last finishing touch for the Parquet material. We need to give some large scale bump to it. If you notice, this is what I'm talking about. Sorry. Okay. Okay, here, look at it. The reflections are a bit curved. This is because the surface is not perfectly flat. It has a slight bump to it. Slight unevenness. To simulate that, we're going to use a noise map in the bump slot. So we still want to use our Brittany bump texture, and we want to add the noise map to it. So how do we do that? We will use the mix map. So go into the bump slot, click on this bitmap button, and choose mix. Make sure you keep old map as submap, and we have created a mix map with our Brittany bump in the first slot. So we're going to go to the second slot and assign the noise map there. Assign a noise map, increase the noise size, example 200, and change the mix amount to, let's say, 50. Since we've since we've mixed our Brittany bump with noise, we need to increase the bump value a bit to bring it back where it was. Okay, like this. So let's see. So you can see some slight curving of the reflections here, which makes it much more realistic than the previous version. So another thing we need to do for a nice final result, we need to fix the noisy areas. To reduce the noise, simply increase the subdues to, let's say, 16. Well, we need to increase the more because 16 is not enough. Let's try 32. As you notice, it's rendering a lot longer, but the result is much cleaner. So it looks like 32 is a good value for this particular example of Parquet. Okay, so that's our basic lacquered Parquet. If you want a smoother finish, for example, something more like this, the reflections are much blurrier and there is absolutely no bump except the large scale noise. So you can do that by, let's duplicate the material, reduce the reflection glossiness to 0.8 and change the bump a bit. So just go into the bump slot, cut the noise map, go back and paste it in place of the mix map. So now it's only using the noise map here. Change it to 10. Okay, so let's assign it to our floor and render. So this is basically our smooth, just installed Parquet floor without the bumpiness. I think the reflections for this example are too contrasty. So what I'm going to do is go to the reflect slot, change the color to something gray, and mix it with the reflect map a bit. For example, 50-50 should be okay. Okay, maybe even less. 30% of the reflect map and 70% of the color. So now the reflections are much more even, like in this example here. Okay, so that's how you create a basic Parquet floor. Okay, so there is another variation of this flooring I want to show you. Let's go back to the Photoshop. Undo. Let's get rid of the stroke. So, where is it? So, right here. So the boards are not finished with anything shiny, and just the natural reflection of wood, and the seams are much sharper and the wood boards are less distorted. So we're going to use something like this as our bump map. Let's reduce the contrast of this. Okay. And change our lines layer to pure black. Crisp, sharp lines. Just make this lighter. So, okay, let's make it lighter with curves. Like this. Let's save it. Let's save it as bump 2. Make some time to save these large PNG images. So let's create a copy of this material here. To name it Parquet Natural. You can actually use a bit different diffuse map for it as well to make it less saturated and lighter. You can change the color of the parquet texture just the same way we did with our wood textures. You can make many variations from a single texture. So we've created a copy of this material. Let's change the diffuse map to this. Still saving. Okay. To this saturated version here. Assign it to our floor. Next, go to the reflect map and reduce the glossiness even more. 0.6 maybe, or 5. Okay, 55 would be fine, I think. Let's reduce the IOR to 3, just to make them weaker. So we have our weak, very blurry reflections, low glossiness, lower IOR, and darker reflect color. And now we're going to change the bump map to a mix map. Keep old map as submap, and use our new bump map here. Set the correct size. And mix it at 50% with the bump map, with the noise. Maybe let's increase the strength to 20. And let's try a render to see how it looks. So this is a natural, non-glossy finish for our parquet material. Something very similar to this photograph here. One more thing. I think in this example you can see that the reflect map should be contrastier, more contrasty than it is right now. So we're going to unmix it from the reflect color and use it at 100%. To make it weaker, we will go to the bitmap settings, specifically the output tab, and reduce the RGB level. Maybe increase the contrast a bit. And let's leave it like this. Re-render. Okay, this might be a bit too extreme. Let's change the offset back to 0. And try again. Perfect. Nice smooth wooden floor. So you can use this technique to create many variations of parquet flooring. You can create boards, you can create panels, whatever you need for your project.